There is a little bit of research in academia on the topic of the experience of accessing psychosocial disability supports, but the literature is not yet extensive. Our next speaker, Debra Hamilton, is a lived experience researcher and mental health advocate, and she has been undertaking academic research on the experience of an NDIS participant with psychosocial disability, and her address to us is titled Quality and Safety, Improving the Ride. Following the presentation, Debbie will be taking questions from the audience, so if we can get the mentee details up on the screen again, it's already there. Richard, way ahead of me. We'll leave it up here for a little bit longer than we did the first time around, but that code, 9316-3224, which is up on your screen, and even the QR code there is how you can get your questions through to Debbie, and we'll address them at the end of the presentation. So please join me in welcoming to the stage, Debra Hamilton.
I'm just going to give, is that sound all right for a bit of a sound check? Yep. Okay, I'm just going to give the clicker to Sam. I've done two speeches where the first one was, I clicked and about 4 slides went by. And the other one, it was a really brilliant episode where I had my notes but I hadn't clicked them together. So in the middle of the speech, I reached down and the entire speech went flying across the room. So these days I have a friend in Indeed. So I'm talking to you today from a consumer point of view about improving the safety and improving the ride. I'm using the word consumer because it's so fraught language, isn't it? And so I've just settled on consumer for now. I've wondered from the start why a scheme so much at times delivers quite a bit to some people, but for other people it just doesn't quite fit. And I think the reasons are very complex. I don't think, we know the kind of obvious ones, but trying to understand the nuances, I think will be valuable for changing practice. So I'd like to spend a little bit of time teasing out some of the complexities. And I'm going to take you on a little road trip. And as you can see, this is a road trip around the NDIS. And I'm going to talk about some of the barriers that people might find. So, this is my little car. In 1915, I did a film for the Mental Health Commission because I was one of the first people with a psychosocial disability on the mental health, on the NDIS. And in that film, I said along the way, I think one of my goals will be to do a PhD. And I never thought it would come to fruition, but in 1918, I went to a conference where there was a lived experience academic, and I thought, I'll get to do my PhD, and I met Professor Nick Hancock, and off we went. And I think the thing we honed in on was that the scheme promises choice and control, and it has 3 pages of definitions of all the things in the Act. So the Act has 3 pages, but it doesn't quite define what choice and control is. I think that the perspective of a lived experience is important, and I've come to see it as considering it as an important body of knowledge. And it's much like Auslan. I don't know if you're familiar with Auslan, but it's the sign language for people who are deaf. And the important thing to know about working with people with Auslan is the fact that their grammar is completely different to English. And so you think, they're just signing the straight thing of what people are saying, but it's entirely different. And that's how lived experience knowledge is. It's kind of like just different, and very valuable. So, for consumers, quality and safety can be measured by the extent of control people have in making decisions. I'm going to use an analogy of driving a car. For my research, the first thing I did was a scoping review, looking at all the literature that had been written about the NDIS and people with a lived experience. And people might say, I've had a gut full of this lived experience, or I know I've got to take it into account. But what was really interesting was that there was only one line in 28 pages, 28 studies of people actually talking they had a lived experience. And so that was really interesting. I know there have been some good reports out, but actually in the literature, that's hardly anything. The other thing I've been doing is doing in-depth interviews with participants, either by phone or Zoom, and I've been then transcribing those interviews and taking notes and looking at themes that are emerging and discussing it with people to try and find out maybe where the answer is and what's really going on. So some of the preliminary findings I have, not that I've actually finished, I'm in the middle of it, is losing choice when you first start, having no choice in fact, and when people move. Having an external locus of control. People don't feel they've got any control. They don't get enough information and support to really make clear decisions. Often people just have to make a decision. And finally, if you've got too much choice, you just have very little control. So here you have my little car. It's in a bumpy road. The consumer's trying to drive it, but really it's on a big hump. And you know what happens when you're on a big hump like that. Things usually go awry. So we're in the car, and I'll just read you some of the quotes along the way. So this is at the start, when people really need L plates, and it was very disjointed. I appreciate that there is supposed to be. I really had no idea why I was even on it to begin with. So quite a few people notice, they experience that at the beginning of a scheme, it's incredibly fraught. Where do people go? How do they get supports? Who do they contact? People didn't have any idea. It seems like a huge gap, but people often report no choice when they start. How about when they move? I actually felt that there is actually no well-defined procedure in helping someone actually move regions. There's no formal, well-defined structure on how handover is supposed to happen. The onus of transferring was on me to actually do the transfer, and it actually delayed my finding a psychologist by 9 months. And that's pretty good, really, actually, when people move. It's a real time where people lose any choice and control. And what really strikes me is that the NDIS has been going since 2014, 2015, and these problems, moving and the start, were identified right at the start, and yet people are still doing the same things. So it's really an area that needs to be addressed carefully. Having an external locus of power, others making the choices. I feel like I've been taken out of the community and my health, and I'm now being managed by a not-for-profit industrial complex. Or, oh yeah, we'll throw all these services at people and the choice gets taken out of your hands a little bit, because until you're confident enough to speak up, this is not working for me, or this is. You've got to be able to do that. Or they wouldn't let me write my statements and things like that. And they write it in the first person, like I, Jane Doe, like I, instead of writing she said or he wanted. Sometimes, in fact, people have out-of-body experiences and feel like their supports are driving the car. It looked like pretty good driving by the support worker, but what that provides for the participant might be entirely different. What it looked like, what the guidelines are for weighing up risk and benefits. People say you have the dignity of risk and the right to fail, but I'd like to say that we have the right to risk, and that is what the CRPD is about, the rights of people with disability. For us, communication difficulties, trauma, mental health challenges, the fear of losing everything can make speaking up difficult, particularly making complaints, because you're biting the hand that feeds you. No one, though, should ever have their goals written in the first person, and that's happened to me. There's not enough information to make decisions at times. I feel like, how can I make the best choices if I'm given all the information, and how can I, if I'm not given all the information, and how can I assure that I'm getting the most out of my plan? I'm not always 100% sure that all my choices are being laid out for me. Not enough information. What are the options for that person? What do they need? The map of London down there, the map of London is terrible. It's complex. How are you supposed to follow that map? How are we supposed to, if you guys have trouble understanding the NDIS, it is just a nightmare for people. People need someone sitting beside them, explaining that when the sat-nav in the car says take the second exit in the turning circle, that you actually go straight ahead rather than go right. Proper, supported decision-making is important, and people need a clear explanation of the different options. And finally, this is my favourite, too much choice, little control. I think I'm getting too much happening in my life too quickly, and it's kind of overwhelming. I don't know, because everybody's got different opinions. We have to use our funds. We have to use our funding. I was supposed to be doing this, doing that, doing the other, and finding all these areas that I should be using funding on. And finally, I would end up with 11, 10 or 12 different people walking through my door, which I found really disruptive in my life. Too much choice, little control. The overwhelming amount of information that people have to process to even go on the scheme. It's a time of change for people who start getting support. It's really weird having people, strange people, come into your life and they know so much about you. Privacy's so important. Too much happening at once, too many different people. I've certainly found that. Too many people coming in, and too many different people. Like, it's a huge thing for people that they report that when Joe Blow can't come, the service just sends another person as though they're doing good things. But it's not always like that. People find it really hard. Privacy concerns, as I've just said. That force, that pressure, you need to use your money or you'll lose it. Use it or lose it. How many of us have said that to people? And finally, services are often inflexible. And that's a combination of the trap that you guys are in about needing to do this to survive, but it does lead to difficulties. So I'd like to give you some offerings about what at this stage I think might help. And they are deliberate support at the start and continuous support with a move. So there has to be something worked out what happens at the start much more clearly. And when people move, there needs to be a really good handover process. We need to engender the control within the person. The consumer does the driving. It's worth asking in your practice, who's doing the driving now? Accessible information and support is vital. People need support to make decisions. They need the information and they need it in a way that people are supported. And consistent, flexible services. Flexibility is so important. So a useful reflexive thing, as I've said, is who is driving at any one time? It's nice to kind of ask yourself that. Things change for most of us all the time. Sometimes people need more support and sometimes they need far less support. At times there may be too many people in the car, all backseat driving. You've got to do this, you've got to do that. You know, you want to get rid of all of them, but that's not always the best. And sometimes the driver doesn't need anyone. They can take off in the car. They've got the petrol and the oil from the support services, so they can take off in the car by themselves. And sometimes they need a navigator who knows how to read the map. So I just thought I'd finish off with giving you a little bit of an example. My partner's blind, and she was going out one day with a friend, Anne, and she said, gee, I wish I could drive. I'd really like to drive, you know, as someone who's blind. Just love to drive. So Anne took her to a golf course, and she put her in the driving seat. And the first thing that my friend Kath noticed was the fact that she was much more comfortable in the passenger seat than in the driving seat. And so here she is. So Anne gets in with her and tells her about the pedals and things. Thank goodness there wasn't a clutch. And she grabs the wheels and Anne's saying, okay, push down, go ahead, this way. And they get through about 9 holes. And then Anne gets out this one time, does her golfing, and Kath is in the car and Anne's outside the car, the golf buck, and Anne says, okay, let's try it. And Anne says, go right. But what she doesn't realise is that it's actually left for Kath. And so they nearly had this terrible moment. Safety and quality for consumers, deliberate support at the start and particularly moving on, engendering real control in people, accessible information and consistent, flexible services. Thank you.
Just in the interest of time, we will actually only be taking one question. We've had many questions come through actually, Deb, and some of them weren't actually questions either, some of them were warm comments, so we'll make sure Deb gets all of those. Thank you everybody to have submitted that. The question we're going to give you, Deb, is what strategies would you suggest for giving participants more control and information to make informed decisions?
I have to say that I know that, you know, probably every person in this room wants to know that, wants to find that, because you want the best thing for people. And I have to say that I don't know for sure. I think it's something that we really need to look at and to find out how to best do things. How do we give people support for making decisions within the NDIS? So I actually don't have a clear answer for that, but I think it's something that we need to look at.